normally typhoons, which are hurricanes, come in the Bay of Tokyo and then they turn out. Just like things come into New York City and turn out, you know. They normally come in there and they turn out. And so there was a typhoon coming up. We had just gotten back, our crew had just gotten back, we were still in crew rest. But they called us out, and you just match up with whoever's there. And the plane that I was put in was one that had been in the hangar, and they were afraid that the hangar was going to collapse on it, so they pulled it out onto a parking spot. But the parking spot was 90 degrees to the wind direction. So it's just buffeting like hell. And the wind direction, when we got out there, it was water about 1.5 feet, 2 feet deep. All the Papasans had headed home to save their houses and their families from this typhoon. We had no way of getting out there except to try to run out there with our gear. But one guy had a VW, and he says, "I'll get you guys out there." And we piled 4 people in that. The pilot, the 2 pilots and the navigator, and him as the driver, and he got us out to the airplane. And I said to the aircraft commander, you know, we're 90 degrees to the wind, and when you start up the number 3 engine, I think it's going to tip over. And I said, I don't want to be in the airplane. Yeah, you don't need me anyhow. There's nothing I can do as a navigator. I want to bail out, and if the loadmaster needs help out there with the fire extinguisher or anything, I'll be out there and I can help out. And he says, that's fine, go ahead. So I'm sitting down there at the crew entrance door. Wind's getting stronger and stronger. And all of a sudden one of these pump up by hand engine maintenance stairs, which are this wide and probably weigh 1,000 pounds, went zipping by at, you know, probably 15 miles an hour in this stuff. Roofs were flying through the air. Planes were, C-130s were faced into the storm, and with their engines running and the pilots having to put the yoke forward so it wouldn't go airborne. There was so much wind under the wing. It was wild. We had a couple airplanes that did get off and went over to Korea, which was our normal typhoon evac place that we'd go to. And we found out later on, one of the crews said that there was winds over 200 miles an hour up over Mount Fuji. It was that severe. Anyhow, when I was outside with the flight engineer, or with the loadmaster, we're there at fire guard, this thing did tip over. I went out, got there with him. It reared back on its rear wheels like this. And we were here on a power cart, next to a power cart, and it started weather vaning like this, back and forth, in this violent storm. And this thing weighed over 100,000 pounds with fuel, and as heavy it was. And then it would lurch forward, and we'd look up, and by God, here would be the nose wheel right above us, you know, maybe 6 feet. And then would go back, and then it would do this weather vaning thing. And those 2 pilots and the engineer are still in there, you know. And finally, a guy that was working the line in a big 4-wheel drive Ford truck came by, and the loadmaster and I bailed into the ass end of it, and they took us in, and they came back out for the pilots and the engineers, and they were out of it, and they got back into the squadron, and they finally lassoed this thing, basically. It was like a wild bronco, and got it to where they were able to tie it down. But the mistake that was made was, when they pulled it out there, it was exactly 90 degrees to the wind direction. That was hairy.